Alright, welcome to yet another fabulous Linux Zoo crew, and today on the Zoo, we're going to be talking about wine, and we are not talking about Pinot Grigio, Cabernet Sauvignon, or Shiraz. We're not even going to talk about fine wines, such as Mad Dog 2020 Boone's Farm, or Thunderbird. No, we are talking about wine. Wine is not an emulator. And a concern that a number of people have, wine as a compatibility layer, which allows you to run Windows programs and games, because it is a compatibility layer, it stands to reason that it can also run malware and viruses. Before we start today's conversation, I'd like to share a few words with you from our founder, Voltam.
Hi, I'm Voltam, founder of the Linux Distro community. The Linux Distro community is a place for people to hang out and discuss Linux, Linux distros, software, and open source. The Linux Distro community is a community funded by its members for its members. We are a friendly, welcoming community that encourages people who use Linux operating systems and software to share their passion and knowledge with other people. We believe that when people share information freely, everyone benefits. Our community is also a great place for people who have been using Windows and have been thinking of making the switch to a Linux operating system, a place where they can benefit from the sharing of knowledge. Linux operating systems and software developers have given us all the ability to choose from hundreds of free Linux-based operating systems and thousands of free programs. The least we can do is freely share our knowledge and share with others our experience whilst using this software. If you are using Windows right now and have had enough of all the viruses, spyware, malware, and are thinking, there must be a safer way to use the internet. Please consider using a free Linux operating system today. There are many to choose from. Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Pinguy OS, and Zorin OS are just some of the more popular, easy-to-use operating systems. And for the person who wants more of a challenge from their Linux experience, there is also Arch Linux. Millions of people only use their PC for internet, social networking, voice and video chat, and email. If they only knew that you can do all that on a Linux operating system safely and securely, that's where a community like ours comes in. Not only are we passionate about Linux operating systems and free software, we want other people to feel the freedom that we do when we use our computers. This is all part of a bigger picture, that as humans, we are rewarded by helping others. We were born to share and promote freedom. We'd love to see you become a part of the Linux Distro community. You can voice chat with us on Mumble or text chat with us in IRC. Head over to linuxdistrocommunity.com for details. Join in today in the sharing of knowledge and the freedom that a Linux operating system gives people. Thank you.
All right. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started here. First, I want to read to you an excerpt of the white paper put out by Codeweavers. Now, Codeweavers contributes a lot of code to the Wine project. And what they state here is Wine is a Windows compatibility technology that allows a wide variety of Windows software to run as if natively on Unix-based operating systems like Linux and Mac OS X. From a theoretical standpoint, Wine should also enable malware and viruses to run, thereby, unfortunately, exposing Wine users to the same hazards. Now, as stated in the pre-show chat, basically when you're running Windows applications or games under Wine, you're literally running them in a sandbox. And in today's show, I'm going to talk about a few scenarios, some things that have happened as a result of running some Windows malware within Wine. And I'm also going to talk about a few ways to protect yourself from viruses, malware, and that sort of thing, and other little precautions that you all can take. All right, now, Pizza Dude, it's my understanding that you have a bunch of applications running under Play on Linux. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I do. I have this Play on Linux directory where I just installed Steam via Play on Linux, and whenever I wanted to get a new game on Steam, I would look it up, obviously the system requirements and stuff like that, but I would look it up on Wine, the app database, the winehq.org, I think, and I would see if it's compatible. So my Play on Linux directory is about like 63 gigabytes.
That's a lot. Now let me ask you a question, Pizza. How long have you been running applications and games in Wine?
For about...
You went silent on us there, Pizza Dude.
For about a year now.
Okay, and let me ask you: have you experienced any malware getting into the system, or any funny things happening?
No, I have not.
Okay, all right. And Lectro, are you running any applications in Wine as of late?
I run the odd occasion application in Wine. Like I've run some Blu-ray rippers and stuff like that for converting Blu-rays to MKVs. I have tried Steam in Wine as well. I haven't issued any malware or any viruses that I know of in Wine.
Hey, Setkeh, how you doing? Long time no see.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
Ah, great. We're talking about malware and all that fun stuff infecting Wine. And it's been such a long time since I saw you, but the thing is, I noticed that you mentioned that you've been using Wine for like 5 to 8 years or so. Please tell me a little bit about your experience with it.
Well, see, because I've been using Linux for so long, I've always had the need for so long to be able to run some Windows applications in Linux. Hang on one second, I'm just trying to turn my TV down. To run some Windows applications in Linux, like EVE Online or World of Warcraft or something like that. But generally, from my experiences, everyone turns around and say, oh, Wine's hard and all this stuff. I've never really had much of an issue with it. And I generally find I get better performance out of Wine than I do Windows.
I would have to agree with you there because, for instance, I run Macromedia Flash, I run Macromedia Fireworks, and especially Flash. I've noticed a nice performance boost, especially when I'm creating cartoon characters and I'm using code that has some ActionScript in it, and it tends to work a lot better in Linux than it ever did for me in Windows. Now, as many of you may know, I run a sober living community here in South Florida, and I have Linux machines around the house. Namely because I want the peace of mind in knowing that any of the residents that are here can get the information they need off the internet, maybe play a few games, that sort of thing, without having to worry about them getting viruses. Now, lo and behold, about a month ago, I went to do my regular weekly maintenance on the machine, and I noticed all these little pop-ups coming up, and they were saying, warning, your computer may be infected with a virus. You know what all of these are. Everybody's experienced these at one point in Windows, stating that your computer, has got all these viruses or there's spyware that has crept in. And when you're seeing those pop-ups, folks, that is the malware. That is the virus. And interestingly enough, without even reading any articles online, I immediately figured, okay, somebody must have tried to download this piece of junkware and tried to run the executable. And then, of course, the Vineyard Wine launcher picked it up and installed it into the Wine directory. Lo and behold, I found that when I did a simulated reboot to Wine, the programs stopped running and the pop-ups didn't come up again. And even upon doing an actual reboot of the computer, I noticed that those applications didn't start up all by themselves. And so what I decided to do was just to go ahead and delete the .wine directory, and those programs were gone, and then I went into the downloads folder where the offending exe file was sitting, and I went ahead and deleted that. As Linux users, we really do not consider viruses to be much of a threat. But the thing is, when we are running Windows applications in Wine, there is a possibility that some malware can creep in. I'd like to share... Go ahead, Lectro.
No, just agreeing with what you're saying. We're on Linux and we just think that's it, we're totally immune from anything like that, but unless it's Wine that creates it, we don't really have any worries or issues. I mean, if you don't run Wine and you don't bother with any Windows applications, you don't really have much to worry about if your firewall and that's set up correctly.
Now, one thing that I like to do, and for those of you who have had the opportunity to see it, I created a video on backing up your Wine directory. The reason I do this is because I have my programs that I want to install. I have them configured the way I want them. Bare bones programs, my Flash, my FL Studio, that sort of thing. I have all these programs installed to my liking, and then I create a tarball of the Wine directory just in case something bad happens. Then I can just back it up. Pizza, you wanted to go next.
I think when you run an application in Wine, it can't just run the exe by itself. So I think Linux users are more safe because you know how in Windows you could just download an exe and run it right away?
Yeah, but the thing is, though, like for instance, if you're using Vineyard as a front end and you double click on an executable file that you downloaded, it will ask you if you want to open that in Vineyard Wine Launcher. And then at that point, it's able to run and do whatever it wants to. Just the same as any executable file would in Windows. But there are some things you can do to protect yourself. One thing that I suggest doing is running a virus scan on those executable files before running them. Setkeh, you had a comment.
I've not actually heard or seen viruses in Wine. I'm not saying it's not possible, because obviously it is. But the thing we've got to remember with Wine is it's just a sandbox. So everything inside Wine, it can't escape Wine and get into your main system. So worrying a lot about it that's not worth it, really.
Well, the thing is, though, you don't want to run Wine as root, number one. Also, you may notice that for those, and I'm sure you've seen this, Setkeh, when you've installed some programs in Wine, it will actually put folders into your home directory for storing maybe configuration settings, save games, for instance. I've seen that happen. And sometimes these malware can even write to your .local/applications folder. And there was a case study that I looked at earlier this week where that had actually happened. And this had a bunch of worms and that sort of thing because somebody clicked this little warning saying your computer's got infected with this virus, and it's showing these Windows XP graphics and everything, and the person was gullible enough to download the exe file, run it, and then it started to wreak havoc in the home directory. But the thing is, because the user was not running Wine as root, it couldn't do harm to his main system. But that's not to say that in the future that some of these malware writers may eventually be able to try and do something like that, where try and get people to, put in a password or something like that into the system. Now, an article here on the WineHQ website, actually, this is from the forum. Somebody stated that they have a nasty virus on Wine. It was something that they encountered on a separate Vista machine. And he just to reiterate what I have already said that I have already done in the past, he basically did the same thing, that after doing a reboot, he found that these didn't work. And the general consensus from all of the people who responded to this individual, they basically said, delete your Wine prefix. Don't run anything under Wine as root, superuser, or sudo. Install ClamAV in Linux, or any antivirus software. As a matter of fact, Pizza Dude suggested VirusTotal, and so there are programs that you can use, and I think Avast now has a version for Linux, and I might even have a look at that because I used to use Avast in my Windows before. So I think that's a good idea, and I might even try that. I'm not going to do it tonight, but I'll do it this weekend at some point. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, like you were saying, there's all these antivirus for Linux, and as you notice, the default option is to scan your home directory. So as long as it can scan hidden files in your home directory, it would end up picking up a virus in your Wine files, because they're all stored in the home.
Yeah, and Wine comes with its own DLLs, which usually don't have the same security holes than the ones provided by the Redmond software giant. That means a virus that targets vulnerabilities in the system DLLs is most likely going to be unsuccessful. But the thing is, you can still get some of this scareware and these applications running and that sort of thing. But there are some little tips here that you can do to protect yourself. Before I go on that, what did you have, Electro?
I was just about to say, some people who create viruses have it where it would end up sending like a log file back to the creator of the virus saying that they tried infecting the computer and it didn't work, and it tell them that there were no file, and then the hacker would have worked out that there was running Linux, and then they try and find a way to get around it.
Yeah, and I think as Linux gains in popularity, we're probably going to see a lot more virus writers out there trying to come up with viruses for the operating system. But the thing is, I imagine that has to be a coding nightmare because, I mean, there are so many different Linux distributions out there. How are you going to convince somebody who's running Arch to download a deb file, to download malware into the system? Lectro.
Wouldn't a virus on Linux be kernel specific, or wouldn't it matter what version of kernel you're running? Because they could, in theory, just release a minor kernel update, which won't make the virus work if it was a Linux specific virus.
I wouldn't know about that one. Why don't I pass the microphone over to Setkeh? What is your take on that?
Well, see, the way this Linux by design is designed pretty much so it's almost virus-proof, just about, because of the way the authentication works. You can't access, or as long as you're not doing anything silly like 0777 everything in your system, a virus technically shouldn't be able to move from one, like the stage of installation to the stage of actually infecting all of your machine, because it can't move past a certain level in the security tree. So writing a virus that's specifically for Linux, I mean, besides creating a little bit of havoc inside a user's home directory, or maybe if they run a virus-ish program as root, besides creating a little bit of trouble in a specific set of folders, I don't see the potential, well, not yet anyway, for a major disaster-causing virus in Linux at all. Just because the authentication and the way everything works in the tree for Linux is basically designed around you can't do that.
Yeah, and the thing is, last time I was on the Wikipedia, I think I counted only 49 viruses for Linux. And the thing is, you had to give them root access. And the thing is, most of them have been depreciated by the latest kernels. So I think we can pretty much rest safely in knowing that, our Linux machines really... we just don't worry about viruses. And it's really funny because when I first started the Cup of Linux show last year, I did a show on virus protection and that sort of thing. And I think I did a promo to let people know about Bitdefender, which many of you may know is a wonderful antivirus package. And it just so happened they have this available for Linux users. And you can get a yearly code, lets you unlock it for a year if you register with them. And you know what? I did a scan with this thing once a week. It never found anything. And during this time, I was really putting Linux through its punches. I was trying my hardest. I was visiting reported attack sites. I was, trying my hardest to see if I could get Linux infected with a virus, and it never found anything. And I was like, geez, this is wonderful, Lectro, go ahead.
Yeah, speaking on the moving from Windows and antivirus, I got an email the other day from Avast saying that my home license for a year's run out, so it's been pretty much just over a year since I switched completely from dual boot into Linux only.
Pizza.
There's this good command line virus scanner called ClamScan or ClamAV. I'm not sure which one it is, but It's very good.
And for those of you who don't wish to use the command line, you can download ClamTK from your software repository, and that is a graphical front end for it, which is relatively easy and straightforward to use. Okay, well, let's talk about some easy measures that you can do to protect your Wine directory. Okay, and this is from the Wine Wiki. Under securing Wine, Wine doesn't support most Windows security constructs and instead relies on the underlying operating system for security. Unless you run Wine as root, for instance, it's hard for malicious software in Wine to modify files belonging to other users. But Wine doesn't protect you against malware you run yourself. Except there are a few things that you can do to slightly protect yourself. One can be to run each Windows application in its own bottle and remove and disable executables that this application doesn't need. For example, it gives, once you've set up a bottle, it probably doesn't need Wine CFG anymore. There's also a command called winetricks sandbox, which removes the z:\/ mapping and the symlinks to home, at least until you install Internet Explorer 6 or something that triggers a simulated Windows reboot. Another option that was just mentioned was you can run ClamScan or another antivirus package on Windows binaries manually before running them in Wine. One could use AppArmor to create a profile for an individual Windows app, and they have a link here, and I'm going to have a link to this also in the show notes so that you guys can see this, as well as all of the links to the pages where I have my information, so that you guys can read up on this if you find this of any interest. But the thing is, personally, my own Wine directories, I've never had to restore a backup, plain and simple, mostly because the software that I install into my Wine directories, I trust. The same thing with Pizza Dude. He's got 60 some odd gigs of games that he's downloaded from a trusted source, namely Valve. Setkeh, do you have any thoughts? Electro?
No, no thoughts.
As far as protecting yourself from viruses goes, I know it's a dangerous word, but common sense, really. Wine is pretty specialized, so you should really only be running specialized programs in it, like a game, say World of Warcraft. I know viruses can get in through these games and that sort of thing, but you have a lot less chance if you're not running every executable file you come across on the internet. And also, the website that you download said executable file from, if it looks shady, 9 times out of 10 it probably is. You just got to make sure you're on your toes when you're downloading stuff for Wine. It's the same in Windows, really. You can't just go downloading things willy-nilly and expect to never get a virus. So, like I said, it's a dangerous word, but a little bit of common sense as far as viruses and stuff goes a long way. And like Spatry said, if you do somehow manifest too far, by rights it should never make it outside of your home directory if something does go wrong. But then after reboot, it can't bring itself back.
That is a nice thing, though. Yeah, you're not going to see these things resurfacing because it is my understanding that Wine doesn't have an Autostart function where it's going to automatically, it has its own little registry and that sort of thing for storing your serial numbers and stuff for your applications and games and that sort of thing. But it's not going to automatically load things up right off the bat. So, I mean, that's also a nice thing, too. So your Windows applications and games are only going to start when you choose to execute them. But yes, common sense is a major factor. But it's always good to have an antivirus software as well because, many of you interact with people who use Mac OS X, you interact with people who use Windows, and you don't want them to get infected. So, like emailing and that sort of thing. You always want to double check those kind of things so that you don't infect your friends with viruses. Electro?
Yes, speaking of something like a Mac or whatever, right? Say you're running Safari on Wine or whichever, and you end up getting malware that tracks, like a web tracking cookie where it can track your login details for your online banking. If that gets infected on Safari, say, or whichever Internet Explorer, when you next run Safari or Internet Explorer, will you still have that malware or Trojan if you're unaware, and it'll still be able to track your banking details and stuff?
Well, theoretically here, if, you downloaded this, all right, and you're running another browser from within Wine, and you have that infected, yes, your Wine directory is infected, but it's not going to cause harm outside the home directory as stated. And if that is the case, you definitely want to delete your Wine directory and any files that it put into your home folder just to be on the safe side. Now, And this is one thing I just can't stress enough. You know, when you build a new wine directory or wine bottle for hosting your applications and that sort of thing, install your software just the way you like it. Install all your plugins just the way you like them from a reputable source, of course, and then back it up. That way, in case something does slip in, you can just go ahead and delete that wine bottle or wine directory and then restore it from a backup. And my video tutorial shows you how to do it. It's very easy. It makes a nice little tarball that you can tuck away onto a backup drive or flash drive, depending on how much space you have. And yeah, and the thing is, I've never had to restore from a backup, thankfully. But I always say it's always good to have it and not need it, than need it and not have it. Okay, and we're almost out of time, so I'm going to pass the microphone to Lectro. Do you have any final thoughts?
Not really. No. If we ever think of what the next week's topic could be, just give us a shout or email us if you think of it through the week.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So put it in the show notes below if you have an idea for a topic for next week's show. That'd be great, because I don't have anything yet. Pizza Dude, any final thoughts?
Just don't fall for the thing that says you download from trusted sources, and if you do get infected, which is very unlikely, just delete your wine directory and the stuff that it put into your home folder, and it should be fine.
Setkeh.
Yeah, like I said, it's still a dangerous word, and I hate using it, but common sense. Just be smart about what you're trying to run in wine. Try not to run stuff that either isn't trusted by hundreds of millions of people, or and make sure the website doesn't look too shady when you try and run this stuff. But mainly keep wine to the point. Like if you're just using it to play World of Warcraft, then just do that. If you're using it for Macromedia Flash or whatever, just use it for that. Try not to overcrowd your wine folder to reduce your risk of getting a virus. But if you do get infected, don't stress too much about it. Reboot your machine immediately and then try and remove it afterwards.
And a hot tip from the Spat Man. There is this really cool browser plugin that you can get for Firefox and Chromium, and it may be available on other browsers, and this is called WOT, or Web of Trust. And what it does is it puts this little icon in your search engine results that shows you whether or not a site has been reported trustworthy or not. And you definitely don't want to be clicking on websites that have a yellow or a red icon next to them. You want to visit all the green sites. Those are known to be safe. Setkeh?
Yes. Also, Google does have a Web of Trust function. It's not as talking about, but if Google says it's bad, it is definitely bad. So if you find a file or you find a website with a link to a file from Google and it says it's bad, just get the hell out of it, because it's not worth it. Don't risk your machine unless you really want to.
Excellent advice there. All right. Well, I'd like to thank Lectro, Pizza Dude, Setkeh for joining me tonight, and I'd like to thank everybody in the listening room and everybody who has participated on IRC on this week's Cup of Linux show. Hard to believe that we're already up on number 23. Wow, 23 weeks in a row we've been doing these, and these are always fun conversations every week, and I look forward to seeing each of you same time, same channel. Ciao.
Today's show was brought to you by the Linux Distro Community. Visit us today at linuxdistrocommunity.com and chat with us on Mumble or in IRC on the Freenode network in the Linux Distro Community channel. The Linux Distro Community. Freedom through the sharing of knowledge.